Is there a fighter pilot on board? The desperate cry sliced through the roar of the storm, louder than the thunder shaking the massive Boeing 747. Every passenger froze. The overhead lights flickered as the aircraft jolted in violent turbulence, plunging hundreds of terrified people into chaos. Children screamed, prayers rose in fractured voices, and the once smooth hum of the engines now carried a terrifying vibration. Co-pilot Ethan Carter's trembling voice filled the cabin, broadcast through the intercom like a lifeline already fraying. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a serious emergency. Captain Hayes is unconscious, and I need immediate assistance from anyone with military aviation training. Please, if there's a fighter pilot on board, come forward now." His words sent a ripple of panic across the cabin. Businessmen clutched their briefcases as if money could protect them. Couples held each other, typing frantic farewell messages on glowing phone screens. A flight attendant, pale with fear, stumbled down the aisle, trying to calm those who had already given up hope. The storm was no ordinary turbulence. Outside the reinforced windows, sheets of rain hammered against the fuselage, flashes of lightning exposing endless walls of black clouds. The Boeing groaned as if protesting the punishment of nature itself. In this moment, with 312 souls suspended between survival and disaster, the silence after Ethan's plea was deafening. No one moved. No one raised a hand. Could it be true that out of hundreds of passengers, there was no one capable of answering the call? Or perhaps someone was hiding in plain sight, underestimated, dismissed, unseen until the very moment the world demanded a hero. Would you have the courage to stand up in a moment like this? Hit the like button if you believe true heroes often come from the most unexpected places, and subscribe to follow the rest of this unbelievable journey. In row 23C, a woman stirred. Her seat had been unremarkable, her presence invisible until now. Danielle Brooks, 34 years old, slowly opened her eyes. She hadn't meant to fall asleep so deeply, but years of combat missions had taught her to grab rest whenever she could. On dirt runways, in noisy hangars, even in the belly of cargo planes rattling through enemy skies. Sleep, for her, was survival. But the tone of the co-pilot's voice sliced through her fatigue. It wasn't just fear, it was desperation, the kind that only another pilot could recognize. Danielle sat upright, her body instantly alert, scanning the cabin with quiet precision. She looked nothing like the savior the passengers were praying for. Dressed in simple jeans, a plain blouse, and worn sneakers, with her natural curls tied back in an easy bun, she appeared ordinary, almost forgettable. That was the point. Life had taught her the power of blending in, of letting others underestimate her. A few rows away in first class, Gregory Stanton, the powerful investor with imported glasses and an ego to match, muttered with disdain, "If anyone here were truly qualified, they wouldn't be stuck in economy." His words dripped with the arrogance of a man who had only ever judged people by their seats, their clothes, their status. He didn't even glance at Danielle, because why would a billionaire businessman imagine that the unassuming black woman in economy might be the one person capable of saving his life? Danielle exhaled slowly, steadying herself as the plane jolted again. She had survived missiles, sandstorms, and nights when the horizon itself seemed to vanish. She knew what storms demanded: clarity, courage, and timing. And though no one else on that plane realized it yet, the woman they ignored was already preparing to answer a call bigger than all their fears combined. The Boeing shuddered violently, its steel frame groaning under the assault of the storm. Overhead, compartments rattled, spilling a few loose bags into the aisle as passengers screamed. Children's cries rose into frantic wails, mingling with the sharp commands of flight attendants who were themselves trembling but trying to mask their fear. A man near the back clutched a rosary, whispering Hail Marys through clenched teeth. A teenager recorded shaky video on her phone, whispering to her followers, "We might not make it through this." Another woman sobbed uncontrollably, pressing her child's face into her shoulder while rocking him back and forth, desperate for comfort she herself no longer felt. Some passengers had given up altogether. The glow of phone screens lit the cabin as people typed final messages. "I love you. Tell the kids I'm sorry. Remember me." The air smelled of sweat, fear, and recycled oxygen, thick with the weight of collective panic. The intercom crackled again with Ethan Carter's broken plea. His voice, though professional, betrayed the tremor of a man confronting his limits. "Please, if anyone has combat aviation training, identify yourself. We are losing altitude, and I cannot do this alone." Every ear heard the desperation, every heart understood the gravity, yet no one moved. Passengers exchanged looks, but no hand rose. For them, the words fighter pilot belonged to another world. Movies, history books, stories of heroes they assumed could never be among them now. Danielle Brooks watched quietly, her sharp eyes absorbing the chaos. She could feel the despair pressing in like the storm outside, demanding someone to step forward. Yet still, she waited, measuring the moment as the realization grew inside her. If she didn't act soon, no one else would. The silence after Ethan Carter's desperate plea was broken by the scrape of a leather shoe against the carpet. Gregory Stanton, silver-haired, immaculately dressed, the kind of man who believed money was a shield against reality, rose from his plush first-class seat. His designer glasses glinted as he tugged at his tailored jacket, raising his voice above the chaos. "Listen here," he shouted toward the cockpit, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade but carrying none of its power. "My brother-in-law is a private pilot. I've flown with him dozens of times. I can help." Some passengers exhaled in relief at the sound of a confident voice, clinging to any illusion of leadership. A young mother even whispered, "Thank God someone knows what to do." But a nearby flight attendant quickly rushed over, her expression stricken. "Sir," she said firmly, though fear wavered beneath her professionalism, "we need someone with specific military aviation experience. Civilian training isn't enough to handle these conditions." Gregory's chest puffed up with indignation. "Are you doubting me? I paid $15,000 for these seats. I've flown in more private jets than you've had hot dinners. Who on this plane has more experience than me?" The arrogance was palpable, radiating from him like static. He wasn't offering calm or skill. He was demanding authority, trying to purchase credibility with money and ego. Around him, murmurs spread. Some nodded uncertainly, desperate for leadership in any form. Others exchanged skeptical glances, their faith wavering, but their fear louder. From row 23C, Danielle Brooks watched quietly. She had seen men like Gregory before, men who mistook privilege for competence, volume for authority. And she knew with cold certainty that if someone like him seized control, disaster would follow. As Gregory Stanton's voice echoed through the cabin, filled with entitlement and bluster, the storm slammed the Boeing again. Overhead, bins rattled, a drink cart toppled, and passengers shrieked as the aircraft dipped sharply. The chaos seemed to amplify Gregory's arrogance, his words ringing hollow in the ears of those praying for real salvation. In row 23C, Danielle Brooks drew in a long breath. Years of training had taught her that decisive action often came in silence, not shouting. She unbuckled her seatbelt with steady hands, her movements deliberate and precise, so unlike the frantic motions all around her. The aisle trembled beneath her shoes as she stood, heads turned, eyes narrowing with confusion. Why would this woman, dressed simply, without a badge, without a uniform, rise now? Some passengers watched with curiosity, others with open skepticism. Whispers rippled like static. "Who is she? What does she think she's doing?" Gregory scoffed audibly, his voice dripping disdain. "This is ridiculous. Sit down before you make things worse. This is no place for amateurs." But Danielle didn't respond. Her calm presence was answer enough. Step by step, she walked down the narrow aisle toward the front of the plane. The contrast was striking. Gregory, puffed with ego, shouting for attention, and Danielle, composed, silent, steady. The weight of true authority was in her posture, in the unshakable steadiness of her stride. Passengers parted instinctively, unsure why they were making space, but unable to deny that something about her felt different. In that moment, without uttering a single word, Danielle Brooks announced herself. Not as a victim of circumstance, not as another terrified traveler, but as the one person on board prepared to face the storm head-on. Danielle reached the front of the cabin, the storm's roar pressing against the fuselage, as if determined to drown every human sound. A flight attendant, her hands trembling, moved to block the way. "Ma'am, please, you can't be here." Danielle's reply was calm, measured, but it carried a weight that silenced even the chaos. "Excuse me, Colonel Danielle Brooks, United States Air Force, 500 hours of flight time in F-22 Raptors, specialist in extreme weather navigation." The words seemed to hang in the air, sharper than thunder, heavier than the aircraft itself. For a moment, no one breathed. Passengers who had dismissed her as ordinary blinked in disbelief, their mouths half open as the reality sank in. Gregory Stanton stared, his face twisting with a mix of shock and denial. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's impossible. Someone like you—" He cut himself off, but the venom in his tone was unmistakable. Yet the flight attendant took a step back, her eyes widening. There was something in Danielle's presence that couldn't be faked, an unshakable composure, the steady poise of someone who had stared down death before and survived. Whispers spread like wildfire. "She's a colonel? Did she just say Air Force? Is that even true?" Danielle didn't flinch beneath the scrutiny. Her gaze was steady, her voice clear, her tone free of pride or apology. She wasn't asking for permission. She was stating fact. In that instant, the cabin shifted. Doubt remained, yes, but so did possibility. For the first time since the captain collapsed, hope flickered in the eyes of strangers. And as the storm rattled the plane, Danielle Brooks stood firmly in the aisle, the quiet embodiment of a truth the passengers had yet to grasp. The hero they needed had been here all along. The silence didn't last. It fractured under the weight of whispers, mutters, and uneasy laughter. An elderly woman in first class leaned toward her seatmate, her voice trembling but loud enough for others to hear. "She looks far too young. Could she really be qualified?" The subtext was sharp, cutting Danielle in a way no turbulence ever could. Gregory Stanton seized on the doubt like a shark scenting blood. He rose again, smoothing his jacket as though he were the only adult in a room full of children. "Colonel, was it?" he said, his tone soaked in condescension. "Look, I respect our military. Truly, I do. But let's not gamble 300 lives on a fantasy. My wife and I paid a fortune to avoid situations like this, not to put ourselves in the hands of wishful thinking." Laughter, nervous and brittle, bubbled from a few passengers desperate to cling to his confidence. Others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Danielle's eyes, too afraid to voice support. Danielle felt the old burn return, the same fire that had chased her through the halls of flight academies, through barracks, through combat missions where her presence had been questioned again and again. She had heard these doubts before, sometimes from rivals, sometimes from commanding officers, too often from those who had never flown through anything harder than a clear blue sky. Her jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. Inside, she summoned the discipline that had carried her through every storm. She had no need to shout or boast. The truth would reveal itself, not through words, but through action. And yet, as she looked around at the fearful faces, she understood. If she didn't prove her competence soon, prejudice, not the storm, would destroy them first. Gregory's dismissive laughter echoed like static, but Danielle didn't waste breath sparring with him. She turned her gaze toward the front, her voice calm yet commanding, aimed directly at the trembling co-pilot who was still struggling to maintain composure. "Mr. Carter," she said evenly, "I need altitude, speed, and weather conditions." Ethan Carter blinked, startled by the sharpness of her tone. Something in it cut through his panic. Authority, discipline, the kind he had only ever heard from commanding officers. Automatically he answered, "We're at 38,000 feet. Speed 450 knots, crosswinds 120 kilometers per hour, gusts up to 160. Danielle nodded, her focus razor sharp. Then, without hesitation, she began to recite. Emergency procedure for loss of pressurization at cruising altitude. Oxygen masks deployed, immediate descent to 10,000 feet, angle not exceeding 15 degrees to avoid structural failure. Communications protocol, squawk 7700. Cabin crew prepares for rapid decompression. Her voice didn't waver. She continued for nearly 2 minutes, reciting checklists, procedures, and fallback protocols with flawless precision. The cabin fell into stunned silence. The only sounds were the roar of the storm and the steady rhythm of her voice, measured, clinical, authoritative. Ethan's eyes widened. For the first time since the emergency began, relief flickered across his face. "Ma'am," he whispered into the mic, "the cockpit is yours." Around them, disbelief cracked into something else, respect. Passengers who had muttered doubts moments earlier now stared, transfixed, realizing they were not hearing Wikipedia trivia or bluff. This was the sound of training, of lived experience, of someone who had carried lives on her shoulders before. And as Gregory Stanton glared, grasping for another insult, it was clear his voice no longer carried the same weight. The cabin's silence pressed in, thick and uneasy, as the storm raged beyond the windows. Danielle stood steady, her posture unshaken, but inside, old wounds stirred like ghosts awakened by the lightning's glare. She remembered the first time she wore her flight suit at the academy, the weight of expectation heavy on her shoulders. A white colonel had eyed her name tag with suspicion, his voice cold. "Are you sure you're in the right place, cadet? These cockpits aren't for charity cases." The sting of those words had never left her, etched deeper than any scar. She saw again the boardroom where promotions were handed out, her record the strongest, her hours the longest, her missions the most dangerous. Yet her name was passed over, replaced by someone less qualified but easier for the establishment to accept. The whispers had followed her everywhere. Quota higher, token, lucky break. Those memories might have broken someone else. But Danielle had learned to transmute insult into fuel, rejection into sharpened steel. Every sneer, every dismissal had forged her into something unshakable. Now, as Gregory Stanton's mockery echoed in the back of her mind, Danielle drew from that well of fire. Her breathing slowed, her pulse steadying. She wasn't fighting for recognition anymore. She was fighting for the lives of 300 strangers who still didn't believe in her. She lifted her chin, her voice calm but heavy with the weight of lived truth. "I've been underestimated my entire career," she said quietly, almost to herself. "And every time I proved them wrong, not with words, but with results." The plane jolted hard, screams filling the cabin once more. Danielle didn't even flinch, because storms, whether of wind or of prejudice, had never been enough to shake her. The plane rattled again, lightning splitting the sky outside like jagged scars of white fire. Passengers cried out, clutching their armrests, their faith slipping with every violent lurch. Gregory Stanton's mocking words still lingered, poisoning the air with doubt. Yet Danielle Brooks did not falter. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of those who dared to look at her. Her expression was calm but unyielding, forged in the crucible of storms far greater than this one. She let the silence draw tight, like a bowstring ready to snap, before she spoke. "There are 3 kinds of pilots in this world," Danielle said, her voice low but carrying through the cabin, strong enough to steady even the shaking walls around them. "There are those who fly when it's easy, there are those who fly when it's hard, and then—" She paused, letting the weight of the moment press into every soul on board. "There are those who fly when it's impossible." Her words cut through the storm's roar. Some passengers gasped softly, others froze as if something inside them shifted. This wasn't bravado, nor a speech rehearsed for applause. It was truth, carved from lived experience, delivered with the authority of someone who had danced with death in the sky and returned to tell the tale. Danielle took one deliberate step toward the cockpit, her balance unshaken as the plane shuddered violently again. "I belong to the last kind," she said firmly. The hush that followed was different this time. It wasn't disbelief, it was awe. For the first time since the emergency began, passengers looked at her not as an intruder, not as an ordinary woman in jeans, but as the one person who might carry them through the impossible. The aisle seemed to stretch endlessly as Danielle moved forward, every step echoing louder than the thunder crashing outside. Passengers instinctively shifted aside, watching her as though unsure whether to fear her audacity or cling to it as their last hope. Gregory Stanton muttered something bitter under his breath, but no one echoed him this time. At the cockpit door, a flight attendant's hand shook as she reached for the latch. Danielle met her eyes, steady, unblinking, commanding, and the attendant hesitated only a heartbeat before stepping aside. The door swung open, and the world inside was chaos. Captain Douglas Hayes convulsed violently in his chair, medical alarms screeching in a maddening chorus. The cockpit itself trembled, its panels alive with warning lights. Beside him, Ethan Carter sat frozen, his knuckles white on the controls, sweat streaming down his temples. His wide eyes found Danielle's silhouette in the doorway like a drowning man spotting a lifeboat. First aid now," Danielle ordered. Her voice sliced through the noise with surgical precision. She knelt, checked the captain's vitals with practiced speed, then turned to Ethan without missing a beat. "You're not alone anymore. I've got this." The co-pilot inhaled sharply, his breath hitching as though a crushing weight had been lifted. "Ma'am, the controls are yours." Danielle slid into the captain's seat, her hands finding the yoke with an intimacy born of thousands of hours in cockpits across hostile skies. The storm rattled the aircraft again, but her movements were smooth, fluid, as if turbulence itself bowed to her touch. For the first time since the nightmare began, there was order in the cockpit. Not peace, not safety, but direction. And that, Danielle knew, was how survival began. Danielle adjusted the headset, her fingers steady despite the storm clawing at the aircraft's frame. Beside her, Ethan Carter monitored the panels, his breathing steadier now, anchored by the calm presence in the captain's seat. Captain Hayes lay strapped and stabilized, his condition critical, but no longer spiraling into chaos. Danielle pressed the intercom. The cabin speakers crackled, and then her voice filled every corner of the plane, strong, calm, utterly commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone carrying the weight of certainty. "This is Colonel Danielle Brooks, United States Air Force. I am taking command of this aircraft until we are safely on the ground. Please remain calm and follow all instructions from the crew." The effect was immediate. The panicked murmur in the cabin quieted. Passengers leaned in, gripping their armrests, clinging to her every syllable. There was no trace of hesitation in her voice, no faltering under pressure. It wasn't the tone of someone seeking approval, it was the voice of command, of a leader used to being obeyed without question. Even Gregory Stanton, who had been pacing with indignation, froze mid-step. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a chill of involuntary respect. Danielle continued, her words wrapping around the passengers like a lifeline. "We are facing severe weather, but I assure you, I have flown through storms far worse than this one. I will get you home." For the first time in nearly an hour, the cabin fell into something resembling order. Not peace, not comfort, but the fragile beginnings of trust. If you feel the same surge of hope the passengers felt when Danielle spoke, hit the like button and subscribe. Heroes aren't born in calm skies, they rise in the storm. The cockpit shuddered as another wall of turbulence slammed the plane. Warning lights blinked furiously across the console, alarms screaming in protest. Ethan Carter's fingers danced over the panels, trying to keep up, his voice tight with fear. "Colonel, we're running out of options. The standard procedure is to divert. We have to turn away from this system." Danielle's eyes were fixed on the horizon, or what little of it she could see through the flashing chaos of lightning and rain, her jaw set, her voice low and steady. "We're not going around this storm." Ethan blinked, stunned. "What? With all due respect, that goes against every protocol in the manual." Danielle turned her gaze to him, unshaken. "The manual has never flown through war zones. The manual doesn't know what to do when there is no safe option. We go through the eye." Ethan's heart pounded. The thought of flying a Boeing 747, 312 lives on board, into the most violent part of a storm was unthinkable. His training screamed at him to resist. And yet something in Danielle's voice, in her absolute calm, told him she had walked this path before, in skies far more dangerous. Behind them, the cockpit door rattled as Gregory Stanton forced his way closer. His face was flushed with indignation, voice sharp with contempt. "This is madness. You're putting us all in danger. Turn this plane around immediately. I demand it." Danielle didn't even glance at him. Her focus never wavered. "Demands don't fly planes, Mr. Stanton. Skill does." The storm roared louder, as if daring her to prove those words true. Gregory Stanton's voice rose to a near shout, his words cracking with the arrogance of a man used to being obeyed. "This is collective suicide. You're gambling with our lives. I won't let my family die because some stranger thinks she knows better than the manual." The cockpit door slid open, and for the first time since the emergency began, another figure entered. Dr. Patricia Lee, chief of neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital, stepped forward from first class. Her presence was quiet but commanding, the kind of authority born from years of steady hands in operating rooms where every second meant the difference between life and death. "Colonel Brooks," she said evenly, her voice calm amidst the storm, "I've spent 3 years in military hospitals treating pilots with neurological trauma. I recognize the discipline in your voice, the training in your posture. If you say this is the way, we follow it." Gregory spun toward her, incredulous. "You can't be serious. This is a conspiracy to kill us all?" Dr. Lee didn't flinch. She had faced grieving families, hostile boardrooms, and operating theaters where doubt had no place. She met his anger with unshakable patience. "Mr. Stanton, I've treated hundreds of pilots. This woman has training no amount of money can buy. If you want to live, you'd better start trusting her." The air in the cockpit shifted. Ethan Carter looked at Danielle, his own fear tempered by the surgeon's words. For the first time, Stanton's bluster rang hollow. The passengers beyond the door fell quiet, listening, weighing the credibility of two professionals who radiated confidence against the empty noise of one man's pride. Danielle gave Dr. Lee a single nod, soldier to surgeon, warrior to healer. It was enough. She was no longer alone. Danielle adjusted the frequency dials with a precision that came as naturally to her as breathing. "Ethan," she said calmly, "tune to 121.5, military emergency frequency." He hesitated, glancing at her, but something in her unwavering tone silenced his doubt. His fingers turned the knobs. Static hissed, then cleared. Danielle leaned into the mic, her voice steady, deliberate. "Andrews Air Force Base, this is Colonel Danielle Brooks, call sign Spectre, declaring civil emergency. We require immediate confirmation of identity and assistance." The cabin speakers carried her words, spilling them to the passengers. Every ear strained, every heart paused. Even Stanton froze, his mouth hanging open as if caught mid-protest. The response was immediate, crackling through the storm. "Spectre, is that really you?" The voice on the other end was sharp, urgent, reverent. "This is Commander Luis Rodriguez, Andrews Air Force Base. You disappeared from radar 20 minutes ago. The entire Air Force is mobilized looking for you." Gasps rippled through the passengers. Stanton's color drained from his face, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of reality. He had mocked her as a pretender, yet here was the United States Air Force confirming her name with awe. Danielle's reply was crisp, professional. "Confirmed, Commander. We have a simultaneous medical and weather emergency. Captain incapacitated. I am assuming command of this Boeing 747, requesting coordinates for emergency landing." The radio crackled again. "Spectre, you have top priority. All East Coast airspace is cleared for you. Medical teams are standing by." Ethan Carter's eyes widened, his voice barely a whisper. "They know you." Danielle's hands stayed steady on the yoke. She didn't need their recognition, but the passengers did. And now, the truth had stripped every ounce of doubt away. Gregory Stanton sank back against the bulkhead, silent at last. No sooner had Andrews confirmed her identity than the storm answered with fury, as if unwilling to yield its hold. The Boeing 747 lurched violently, lightning cracking so close that the cockpit lit up in blinding white flashes. Alarms shrieked across the control panels, a chorus of warnings demanding the impossible all at once. The radio crackled again, this time carrying a voice heavy with dread. "Spectre, this is Commander Rodriguez. Critical update. The system is intensifying beyond forecast. Winds at 180 kilometers per hour. Hail the size of baseballs. All airports in the region are shutting down. You are the only aircraft still in the air." The words struck the cabin like a hammer. Gasps rippled down the aisles. One woman began sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her child tighter. A man muttered, "We're finished," and buried his face in his hands. Gregory Stanton slumped against the wall, pale as the lightning flashing beyond the windows. For the first time he was speechless, not silenced by pride, but by terror. In the cockpit, Ethan Carter's breath quickened. His training screamed at him that they had entered a death trap. "Colonel," he stammered, "there's no protocol for this. We're flying into an apocalypse." Danielle Brooks didn't flinch. Her hands rested steady on the controls, her eyes locked on the shifting patterns of cloud and light. She wasn't seeing chaos, she was mapping currents, angles, weaknesses. Years of combat missions whispered to her, "There is always a way." Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Then we make one." The storm roared louder, as if enraged by her defiance, battering the aircraft with another bone-rattling jolt. But for the first time, the passengers sensed something greater than fear in the cockpit. They sensed resolve. The Boeing jolted so violently that overhead bins popped open, spilling luggage down the aisle. Screams filled the cabin, prayers overlapping into a desperate chorus. In the cockpit, Ethan Carter's hands shook as he clung to the console. "Colonel, we can't hold her much longer. The turbulence is tearing us apart." Danielle Brooks scanned the instruments, her eyes sharp, her mind calculating faster than the storm could strike. She saw not chaos, but patterns, currents, vectors, possibilities invisible to anyone else. Then, with the calm certainty of someone who had already survived the impossible, she made her decision. "We're going into a controlled spiral descent," she said. Ethan's head snapped toward her. "Spiral descent? Colonel, this is a 747, not a fighter jet. That maneuver has never been attempted in a commercial aircraft. It's suicide." Danielle didn't look at him. Her hands moved across the controls with quiet authority, adjusting trim, recalibrating rudders, preparing the beast of a plane to dance like a jet. It's survival. We thread the eye of the storm, ride the descending air currents down. It's the only path left. Behind them, the cockpit door rattled as Gregory Stanton forced his way in again. His voice cracked with fury and fear. "This is madness. You're going to kill us all." Danielle didn't turn. Her focus was iron. "Mr. Stanton," she said, voice calm as steel, "tourists don't give orders in cockpits. Sit down, or the storm won't have to finish you. I will." Ethan swallowed hard, torn between terror and awe, and in that moment he realized she wasn't improvising. She was executing a strategy no manual had ever written, a maneuver born only in the crucible of war. The storm thundered in defiance. Danielle Brooks tightened her grip. "We spiral," she said, "and we live." Radar screens across the eastern seaboard lit up with an anomaly no one could believe. A Boeing 747 was plunging into the very heart of a Category 5 storm, yet its trajectory wasn't chaos. It was controlled. It was precise. In the war rooms of Andrews Air Force Base, commanders clustered around glowing monitors, their voices tight with disbelief. "She's holding it steady at a 4,000 foot per minute descent," one officer reported, his tone caught between awe and terror. That's impossible." The radio crackled again in Danielle's cockpit. "Spectre, this is General Patricia Hayes, Pentagon Air Operations Command. We are monitoring your descent. Confirm, are you attempting a spiral maneuver in a civilian aircraft?" Danielle's reply was clipped, calm, unshaken. "Affirmative, General. Same principles as Operation Tempest Shield 2019. Different variables, same outcome." General Hayes exchanged a glance with her staff. One whispered, "Is she talking about the C-130 rescue?" The general nodded grimly. "Yes. She guided 17 aircraft out of a sandstorm blind, using only radio commands." In the cabin, the announcement spread quickly through hushed whispers. The Pentagon was watching. The President of the United States had been briefed. The fate of 312 ordinary passengers was now a matter of national attention. Gregory Stanton sat slumped in his seat, his earlier arrogance hollowed out. His world of stock portfolios and first-class privileges meant nothing here. The woman he had dismissed was operating on a level he couldn't even comprehend. Meanwhile, Danielle adjusted her calculations, her voice steady over the intercom. "All civilian aircraft must divert. No one follows our path." The storm roared louder, but the world had turned its eyes to a single black woman in the cockpit of Flight 237. For the first time, they weren't doubting her. They were praying she would succeed. The aircraft tilted into its dive, the nose dropping with a smoothness that belied the chaos outside. Passengers screamed as gravity shifted. Drinks, purses, and loose objects slid toward the aisle. Yet Danielle Brooks's hands were steady, her movements as precise as if she were guiding a fighter jet, not a lumbering commercial giant. "Vertical speed 3800 and holding," Ethan Carter reported, his voice trembling with awe. "Controls responding. But, Colonel, this shouldn't be possible." Danielle's eyes never left the instruments. "It's applied physics, Lieutenant, and 17 years of experience turning the impossible into routine." The storm clawed at the fuselage, winds shrieking like 1,000 voices. Lightning exploded around them, painting the cabin in blinding flashes. A child wailed in terror. Her mother whispered frantically, "Hold on, baby, hold on." But the plane did not spiral out of control. It glided down the storm's throat like an arrow threading a needle. In the cockpit, Stanton clutched the bulkhead, pale and sweating. "This is insane," he muttered, but no one listened anymore. His protests had been swallowed by the living proof unfolding before their eyes. From the radio, the voice of Commander Rodriguez at Andrews trembled. "Spectre, radar shows your trajectory holding steady. I don't know how you're keeping that aircraft intact, but it's working." Danielle's lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind only warriors know, the recognition of mastering chaos on its own terms. "I told you," she murmured. "We spiral, and we live." The descent continued, violent yet controlled. Passengers pressed into their seats by the force of gravity. Terror and awe mingled in the cabin, but one truth became undeniable. They were in the hands of someone who had wrestled storms before, and won. The spiral descent carved them lower and lower through the storm until at last a break appeared, a corridor of calmer air like the eye of a hurricane. Danielle Brooks steadied the yoke, adjusting trim and throttle, coaxing the massive Boeing into a glide path that should never have been possible in such conditions. The radio crackled again, urgent and clear. "Spectre, this is Dover Air Force Base. Main runway has been cleared, emergency foam deployed, fire and rescue units in position, ambulances standing by. You have absolute priority." Danielle acknowledged with a crisp nod, her voice firm. "Copy that, Dover. Flight 237 is inbound." In the cabin, passengers held each other, the hush broken only by gasps and whispered prayers. Some were still crying, but there was something new in the air. Hope. They had witnessed what no civilian should ever see, a machine of steel and fire bending to the will of a single pilot who refused to yield. Ethan Carter wiped sweat from his brow, his voice steady for the first time since the emergency began. "Colonel, instruments show we're aligned. Vertical speed normalizing. Fuel levels safe for approach." Danielle's hands never wavered on the controls. "Then let's bring her home." Behind them, Gregory Stanton sat slumped, his once commanding posture reduced to silence. He had no words left. The storm, the Pentagon, the cleared skies, all bore witness to the truth he had tried to deny. The woman he dismissed had become their only salvation. Outside the cockpit, the faint glow of runway lights broke through the darkness. The ground was closer now, tangible, waiting. Danielle Brooks exhaled slowly. "Prepare for landing," she said, her voice calm as ever. "And hold on tight. We're not through yet." The runway lights shimmered faintly through breaks in the storm clouds, a fragile promise of safety drawing closer with each passing second. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere had shifted. Panic no longer ruled. Purpose did. Ethan Carter sat straighter, his hands firm on the secondary controls. Sweat still traced his brow, but his voice no longer cracked with fear. "Fuel stable. Flaps adjusting. Airspeed steady at 150 knots, he reported crisply, his tone carrying the confidence of a man who finally believed in himself again. Danielle gave a brief nod, her eyes still locked on the instruments and the faint glow ahead. "Good work, Ethan. Keep monitoring. I need updates every 30 seconds. "Yes, ma'am," he answered, and for the first time he meant it not out of fear, but respect. Behind them, Dr. Patricia Lee leaned over Captain Hayes, her practiced hands checking vitals. The medical alarm still blared, but her calm presence turned them from a death sentence into a challenge to be solved. "Pulse is weak but steady," she called out. "He'll need immediate transfer to trauma care once we're down, but he's holding for now." Danielle's voice softened just slightly. "You've got him, Doctor. I'll get us to the ground. Together, we finish this." For the first time, 3 professionals, soldier, surgeon, and co-pilot, were in unison. Their fear transmuted into precision. They weren't passengers on Fate's ride anymore. They were a crew. In the cabin, passengers noticed the shift too. The sobs had quieted. Parents whispered words of reassurance they barely believed minutes ago. Hope, fragile but real, threaded its way through the rows. Danielle tightened her grip on the yoke. Leadership had spread like fire, igniting everyone around her. And now they were ready for the landing that would define them all. While the cockpit pulsed with focus and unity, a different storm raged in Gregory Stanton's chest. He sat in first class, slumped against the window, his designer suit wrinkled, his hands trembling despite himself. For the first time in decades, the armor of wealth and arrogance no longer shielded him. Around him, whispers had turned sharp. Passengers he once impressed with his loud confidence now eyed him with contempt. "That's the man who tried to stop her," a young woman muttered. "He called her a fraud," another added, bitterness in her tone. Phones that had once typed farewell messages now recorded his humiliation. Every sneer, every dismissive remark he'd spat at Danielle Brooks, captured forever. Gregory caught fragments of the intercom chatter, the Pentagon confirming her name, Andrews Air Force Base deferring to her authority, Dover preparing runways at her command. Each word hammered home the truth he could no longer deny. The woman he had ridiculed was not only competent, she was extraordinary. His wife, Victoria, sat rigid beside him, her face pale but her eyes sharper than he'd ever seen them. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but devastating. "You told us she was a danger. You made us doubt her. And now, Gregory, she's the only reason we're still alive." Her words cut deeper than the storm ever could. For the first time, Gregory felt the sting of irrelevance, not because of turbulence, but because of prejudice. He had misjudged her, and everyone knew it. As the aircraft descended closer to safety, Gregory Stanton realized that survival would not save him. His name, his pride, his empire, they had all been shattered long before the wheels touched the ground. The wheels screeched against the foam-covered runway, sparks of friction swallowed by the storm's dying roar. Fire trucks raced alongside, sirens wailing, while ambulances stood ready at Dover Air Force Base. And then, against every forecast, against every doubt, the Boeing 747 rolled to a stop. 312 lives exhaled as one, relief breaking into applause, sobs, and stunned silence. But the story didn't end there. Within hours, the landing of Flight 237 became a global headline. Images of Colonel Danielle Brooks stepping out of the cockpit, steady and unshaken, spread across screens from New York to Tokyo. The phrase, "leadership has no color, it has character," appeared on banners, news stickers, and later, towering billboards in Times Square. For the passengers, the memory was seared forever. A black woman in simple jeans, once dismissed as ordinary, had rewritten the definition of heroism before their eyes. Parents told their children about her courage, young cadets memorized her name, and across the nation, people whispered one truth. Danielle Brooks had not only saved lives, she had given hope. Gregory Stanton watched helplessly as clips of his arrogance went viral. His sneers, his dismissal of Danielle's credentials, his open prejudice, now broadcast to millions. Strangers mocked him, clients abandoned him, and even his own family pulled away. The storm had spared his life, but it had stripped him bare. Meanwhile, Danielle's face became a symbol, not of survival, but of transformation. Proof that when underestimated voices rise, they change history. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales of resilience and justice. 3 years after that nightmarish flight, the polished halls of Reagan National Airport echoed with the shuffle of travelers. Among the stream of hurried footsteps, Gregory Stanton walked slowly, a cheap suitcase in hand, his blue car dealership uniform hanging loosely from his shoulders. Once a titan of finance, now reduced to a salesman who took the bus to work. He stopped suddenly. Across the terminal, a ripple of attention spread as people turned, phones raised, whispers following like a tide. General Danielle Brooks strode through the concourse, her decorated uniform gleaming beneath the skylights. A small entourage of aides and security flanked her, but her presence outshone them all, commanding, undeniable. Gregory's throat tightened. He stepped forward, heart pounding with a mix of shame and desperation. "General Brooks." His voice cracked. She turned, eyes steady, calm as ever, but colder than he remembered. I need to apologize," Gregory stammered, his arrogance long gone. "For what I said, for what I did. I was wrong. I lost everything because of my prejudice." Danielle studied him for a long moment, her silence more piercing than words. At last, she spoke, not with anger, but with clarity. "No, Mr. Stanton, you didn't lose everything because of me. You lost because you built your life on privilege and pride instead of respect and competence." Her words struck deeper than any headline or scandal. Gregory swallowed hard, tears stinging his eyes. He wanted to beg for forgiveness, but the weight of truth left him voiceless. Danielle nodded once, her gaze unwavering. "The greatest gift you gave me was doubt. Every time you underestimated me, you made me stronger. And today, I don't need your apology. My legacy already answered you." She turned and walked on, leaving him in the shadow of his own collapse. The terminal's noise faded as Danielle Brooks disappeared into the crowd, her uniform catching the last light from the skylight above. Gregory Stanton stood frozen, clutching his worn suitcase, watching her vanish into a world that no longer belonged to him. His pride was gone, his fortune erased, his family fractured, and yet she had not destroyed him. His own prejudice had. Weeks later, Danielle stood before a class of cadets at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Young men and women, wide-eyed and eager, leaned forward as she spoke. They had heard the story of Flight 237, of the impossible descent, of the storm that had nearly broken the East Coast. But what held them most was not the survival tale. It was the lesson behind it. "You will be underestimated," Danielle said, her voice steady, filling the lecture hall. "Because of your age, your gender, your background, or the color of your skin? Let them. While they waste energy doubting you, use that time to sharpen skills they can never question." The room was silent, her words sinking deep into every heart. She paused, then added softly, Success is not revenge, it is proof. Proof that character, competence, and courage outlast prejudice every time. Her legacy was no longer just a miraculous landing, it was a standard, a living reminder that true leadership needs no permission to shine. As she left the podium, applause thundered through the hall. Beyond those walls, billboards bore her image with the words, "Leadership has no color, it has character." Have you ever turned someone's doubt into your strength? Share your story below and subscribe for more unforgettable tales of resilience, courage, and justice.